The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Oftentimes on the show, we talk about topics related to the fundamentals of epistemology, right? How people know stuff, how they think they know stuff, and acquisition of knowledge. And there's a really interesting article in The New Yorker by Maria Konnikova, which talks about a study done by Brendan Nyhan, who's a professor of political science at Dartmouth, where he and a team of pediatricians followed a group of about 2,000 parents who had a child under 17 years old to see if pro-vaccination campaigns would have any influence at all on changing their attitudes towards vaccines. These were all parents who already had anti-vaccination attitudes. Each household received one of four pamphlets. One, which was a leaflet from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention saying there's no evidence at all that links the MMR vaccine to autism. There was a leaflet from the Vaccine Information Statement on the dangers of the disease and that the MMR vaccine prevents measles, mumps, and rubella. There were others that received photographs of children who got these diseases because they weren't vaccinated. And then also one that had a dramatic story from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention about an infant who almost died of measles, seeing if a personal story was effective in changing people's minds. And then a control group received no information at all. The results are, Lewis, which of the different attempts worked best? The medical information, the gruesome pictures, the personal story, which do you think had the biggest effect on people's anti-vaccination views?
If I would guess, I would say that the gruesome pictures had the biggest impact.
The results were nothing worked. None of the methods worked. The first leaflet seemed to reduce misperceptions about the link between the MMR vaccine and autism, but it didn't actually make any of the parents choose to get the MMR vaccine. It simply corrected some of the misconceptions. The other two didn't work. The images of the sick children actually increased the belief that the vaccine causes autism, and the personal story about the kid managed to increase beliefs about the dangers of vaccines. So they went on to figure out why was that, and why is it that some beliefs are reinforced by conflicting information. And what they found is that not all false beliefs are created equal. For example, right now, what's a good example of this? Whether the earth revolves around the sun or the sun around the earth right now is not something that greatly affects your day-to-day, right? You're not really going to act very differently if you believe that the earth revolves around the sun or vice versa. So you're not really going to be resistant to changing your views on that topic if you're presented with evidence that says that what you believe is wrong. This would have been different back in the Copernican era, certainly. But today, it's not really something that day-to-day is a big factor in your everyday life. It seems that those beliefs, the ones that are not directly connected to what is taught in your church every day that you would have to deal with if you change your views, or what's being taught in your school, etc., those beliefs are easier to change with data. However, the beliefs that are directly linked to informing your worldview, that would directly affect your interactions or drastically change how you view certain people that you consider to be authorities, those are the beliefs, Lewis, that seem to resist any and all factual cases being made to change beliefs, and it seems you can almost do nothing about it.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. It seems like every story we talk about that you can somehow relate to this, that seems to be the case. And I guess it's just an inherent human characteristic.
George Lakoff has written about that in this book called Don't Think of an Elephant. And I'm actually going to show you one excerpt where he talks about taxation. And I know that this wouldn't work for a lot of people who just believe taxation is slavery, but there's a passage where he says, what if we presented taxation as something patriotic? And he says, what if we said the following? Taxation is paying your dues, paying your membership fee in America. If you join a country club or a community center, you pay fees. Why? You didn't build the swimming pool. You have to maintain it, though. You didn't build the basketball court. Someone has to clean it. You may not use the squash court, but you have to pay your dues. In other words, it is patriotic to pay taxes. It is traitorous to desert your country and not pay your dues. That wouldn't do much for many people on the anti-tax side, but for some, reframing issues to say the evidence actually fits your worldview is the most effective way to change people's opinion.
So it's going to be very difficult to do that politically, I think, in general. That seems like like an uphill battle, but I guess it's worth a shot.
No question about it. And this just shows us how fighting with people and arguing often will further ingrain them in their beliefs. The best thing to do is show them how the truth fits into their worldview. With some issues, I understand it's not that easy to do. Hey, why are so many game show hosts conservative? It's hardly news that Wheel of Fortune's host Pat Sajak is a conservative. He recently tweeted, opposed to Obamacare. He wrote an article which was opposed to Obamacare, then you must be racist. He also tweeted, I now believe global warming alarmists are unpatriotic racists knowingly misleading for their own ends. Good night. Sajak is not the only conservative TV game show host. Alex Trebek has made allusions to beliefs, including Tea Party beliefs, that there are a lot of people out there who aren't happy with the way things are going, and they've banded together. He has also hosted a Republican fundraiser. Drew Carey of The Price is Right, lifelong conservative libertarian. Bob Barker is mostly known for his spay and neuter your pets advocacy, but he also did an endorsement of conservative lobbyist David Jolly. And Chuck Woolery, the original host of Wheel of Fortune, also active on writing for the Washington Times, the right-wing paper. I don't think this is about hosting game shows specifically, Lewis. What I think it is that most of these game show hosts are typically older white men who are kind of they are on TV, but they're not really part of Hollywood. A lot of these shows are taped independently in different parts of the country. And it's not really that surprising that very wealthy, older, white men are going to be conservative. I don't think there's anything about being game show hosts, but it is interesting that so many of these TV game show hosts are right-wingers.
It is funny, yeah. I think it is more just about being an old, rich white guy, which is primarily what the GOP is made up of.
Think about Wheel of Fortune, though. What is more conservative and misogynistic than a situation where the man, Pat Sajak, does the talking, he runs the show, he moves things forward, while the woman co-host sits up there saying nothing, touching screens to flip letters? That seriously sounds like the GOP's position on women.
I think you might get some emails on this one, David.
Well, am I wrong on that, though? In other words, when we talk about the GOP war on women, so much of it reflects hearings around birth control and women's health rights where only men are talking, right? That is exactly what Wheel of Fortune essentially is.
I just think it's kind of funny to think of Wheel of Fortune as a microcosm for the problems with the GOP in this country.
All right, let's take a break. So much coming up for you today on this Friday program, including a great interview with one of our most popular guests ever. Not a crazy right-winger. You'll enjoy it. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Cutting-edge research shows that President Obama causes lightning, cats, and suicide. Find more unbiased research like that at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Noel Gregg. Noel, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Join Noel as a supporter of this program. Vote with your dollars and get a bunch of great member benefits and perks at davidpakman.com/membership. This week in show history, 1 year ago today, amazing that it's already been a year, former Congressman Anthony Weiner announced he was going to run for mayor of New York City. And this led to just an insane media frenzy, Lewis, involving more allegations of sending out penis pictures, chatting and sexual conversations with some girl from the Midwest. It's crazy to think that he even had a shot at being mayor of New York City in the midst of this entire controversy, but he kind of did for a little while until his campaign basically jumped off a cliff once these allegations surfaced.
The allegations and the altercations that were caught on camera, there were some heated altercations. It did not go well for him. He just didn't play it cool, David, and you got to play it cool, especially after sending penis pictures around.
It wouldn't have been unprecedented because we had Mark Sanford, who won a House seat. He had his Argentinian mistress. We had Newt Gingrich remaining prominent after affairs. David Vitter was reelected to the Senate after involvement in a prostitution ring. In a lot of foreign countries, we actually have the very explicit point of view of, listen, I don't care about any of that stuff. I care about the political positions and what they would do, and I don't believe that their personal lives would in any way affect their legislative agenda or abilities, period. In the U.S., it's not exactly like that.
Right. And in some foreign countries, some of these people become celebrities after they come out of prison, too. That's not really the case here. I think in this country, it's more like people forgetting about what these people did.
2 years ago this week, a study by researchers at Fairleigh Dickinson University found that Fox News viewers were the least informed of all news viewers, even less informed than those who watch absolutely no news at all. Fox News continues to do well in the ratings in spite of this. What does this really tell us, right? I mean, now we're not really surprised by these numbers. We weren't surprised by them 2 years ago. We'd been covering Fox News and right-wing misinformation for a really long time. What does it tell us? Is it just that Fox News is produced in the way that is most visually appealing and it doesn't even matter what it is that they're saying? Is it that they've built a constituency and a business around catering towards specific views that, while divorced from reality, are profitable?
I think they do it all. I think they give people exactly what they want to see visually in terms of your visual stimulus. I think they give people exactly what they want to hear. Overall, it's just like giving someone a piece of cake on a plate. That's basically what Fox News does. And
if you remember 2 years ago was the birther craziness was at its height. And Fox News, while on the one hand claiming to not be participating in the birther nonsense, regularly hosted birthers and allowed them to give their completely outrageous fact-free views. And while the birther stuff has died down, it's just been replaced, right? There's always some kind of issue. Now it's Benghazi, Obamacare. For a little while, it was the IRS so-called scandal. There seems to be this capitalization on this. And it's not just Fox News that does it. It's Fox News that is doing it with regard to firing up the right-wing base for ratings gain.
And they do it masterfully, David. That's why they just dominate in the ratings. I don't really know how to explain it. I guess it's like watching your favorite sports team or something. It's just that's the type of feeling.
4 years ago this week, the Deepwater Horizon disaster was determined to be far worse than we could have imagined. Remember, Lewis, when this was going on, it was like every day we would find out, oh, it's not 100 gallons, it's 5,000 gallons. Oh, okay. Oh, it's not 5,000, it's 100,000. Oh, okay. The exponential nature with which the reports grew worse and worse was it almost made you think we weren't being told the truth from the very beginning, which is, of course, exactly what happened.
That's what always happens with disasters like this. It's kind of like bargaining with a street vendor, right? You have to start really low with the price you offer, and then it just kind of keeps getting higher, and you have to find the middle ground here. So in reality, there is probably more oil leaked than the end estimate.
We still have reports of oil slicks in the Gulf, reports from scientists saying you really still shouldn't be eating that seafood from the Gulf, in spite of the huge campaign to get people down there eating the seafood. At this point, I don't know, Lewis, you're in Austin, Texas. Do you guys have Gulf of Mexico seafood there? Is this a topic of discussion where you are?
It's not a topic of discussion. At least not. I have not had that discussion with anyone. I don't really know where the majority of the seafood here is coming from. I do have seafood occasionally, and I try not to think about it. But if I buy it from a supermarket, at least I can ask there, or it might be labeled.
And where have you ever asked that and said where did this come from?
Not yet. So far I have seen where it's come from, but restaurants I've been to, I have not asked. And to be honest, I would assume that that at the places I've been eating at, people wouldn't really know where it came from. It's probably coming from a larger distributor as opposed to being bought straight from, whoever the distributors are getting it from.
In spite of being told that there are many new precautions and systems in place now to prevent Deepwater Horizon from happening again, it may be true that that exact type of scenario of blowout is less likely to happen. I have no confidence at all that we're now past oil spills, and now we hear about the train-related oil spills all the time. I have zero confidence at all that our oil supply is not constantly putting the environment at risk. And this is what I mean by that is obviously the process of drilling puts everybody at risk. But what I mean is even just the transportation.
Oh, everything: refining, transportation, drilling, and the everyday use of oil. I mean, every single part of the entire process is harmful.
And I also remember from 4 years ago, we interviewed a fisherman from the Gulf named Kuzma Tezvich, and his story of basically the end of his family's ability to make money, at least for a time. I would actually be interested, definitely go back and check out that interview. It's online. I would be interested to follow up with Kuzma and see what ultimately happened to his family's fishing business. I think he was third generation.
Yeah, we should try to do that follow-up. I'd like to add here that I think I recall saying that I recall us talking about the fact that some $250,000 to $500,000 piece of equipment could have prevented this entire disaster. And some people estimate the entire cost of this disaster just on BP's end at being over $55 billion.
Right. Forget about the total social costs, but just from BP's point of view. Now, the question I would have, Lewis, is if they had retrofit every single drilling operation with the $500,000 valve, would it have cost more than the $55 billion? I have no idea. You know, that's kind of that's a different question.
I really doubt it. We're talking about maybe specifically just deep water, or maybe even I don't know, just offshore drilling. I don't think there's any way this being installed on every rig would have cost $55 billion.
Fiscal conservatism, often not at all what it seems. Join us on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. We will take a break. Back with a great interview next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today's classic interview is the first time that astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson was on the show. People a lot of times ask us, Lewis, what the coolest or most interesting interviews we've done are. And oftentimes I think of when Neil deGrasse Tyson has been on the show. And when he was first on, he was not nearly as well known. I mean, now with Cosmos, it's, you know, an incredibly popular network television series. So many more people are aware of him now. Not that he wasn't well known when he was first on the show, but it is very cool to go back to this interview where he answered so many of our questions and just all around was a great guy.
Right. It was when you first told me back then that he would be on the show, I was blown away because we were, of course, aware of him and aware of his, well, I guess at the time, maybe not celebrity, but his reputation. And it was, I was very excited. It was great.
Neil deGrasse Tyson is with us. He's a leading astrophysicist, also director of the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History. The new book is Space Chronicles: Facing the Ultimate Frontier. And it's a fascinating book, and one of the things you go into is how for so long the idea of space exploration was not really politicized. NASA was a group that was, for the most part, supported by both of the two sides we have in American politics, but that as of late, that's actually started to change, and that now there does seem to be kind of a political side to whether or not it makes sense to fund NASA. How did that come about?
Well, first, let me correct you. NASA has always been political. The difference is it's now partisan.
I see.
That's an important distinction. NASA was created in a political climate, in the geopolitics of the Cold War. So, and I can understand and accept, I don't have to like it, but I certainly accept the reality that politics has always orbited NASA. What concerned me deeply in the past decade, going from George W. Bush to Barack Obama, is that I've seen partisan side-taking and partisan bickering tainting the dialogue of what the present and future of NASA needs to be.
And when you look at what the future should be, I mean, what's the ideal scenario, right? I mean, we have on one side the kind of point of view that space exploration is, because it's not a necessity, it should be something that we leave to private industry and let government fund other things. And at the same time, you have those who say, well, we've tried that in other areas of life and it's not gone anywhere. I mean, where should it be, in your opinion?
There's a lot of misunderstanding about the private sector, and many people think that NASA is ceding their preeminence as the leader of space exploration to private industry. That's just false. It's not only false. Private industry cannot lead a frontier because the private industry is not conceived to do so. What private industry does is it asserts a capital marketplace when you can value the risks and the dangers and quantify the costs of that adventure. When you're advancing a space frontier, it's expensive, it's dangerous, the risks are unknown. When you combine those three, you cannot market that to investors. It just doesn't work that way because you have no way to say what the return on the investment will be. So the history of major exploratory missions has always been led by governments. And once you've drawn the maps, and once you assess the dangers and know where the trade winds are and what the costs will be, then you cede that to private enterprise, and then they do it more efficiently than you, and they can be inventive, and you basically spawn entire new industries for having done so.
It's interesting that as the idea of space exploration has become more and more partisan, as you mentioned, we're also seeing the idea of science become much more and more partisan, where there is clearly one political party in this country who seems to kind of resist the influence of science and investigation, and there's one party that, in theory, tends to support it somewhat more. I mean, from your point of view, I'd be fascinated to know, what do you think when you see candidates, particularly in the Republican Party, talk about, well, evolution is one of many theories that is kind of out there, and it's really no different than the theories presented or the ideas presented by religion, for example. Is that a positive thing for the country, or negative?
I see that as a symptom of the fact that we live in a world today, we live in a country today, where science and engineering are not folded in to our sense of self and our sense of our identity, as they were back during the heyday of the Apollo program. During Apollo, science was the engine that generated economies. Science and technology were the forces that would enable the tomorrow that you dreamt of to be brought into today. So I assert that 30, 40 years ago, science and engineering was seen and received in a much more welcome way by all aspects of society than it is today. So I'm going to make the audacious assertion that if you double NASA's budget and we go back into space in a big way, advancing a space frontier, then the innovation culture that would exist in NASA to have to realize that frontier will then permeate the country. And it's that innovation culture that makes people wealthy. And when that happens, people then see the value of science and engineering, and I think all these debates go away.
Do you really? So you think that some of these kind of incredible debates about the science of, of global warming, or the exact time at which someone is a person as it comes to conception and the abortion debate. I mean, all of these things you think might be just pushed absolutely out of the mainstream if science is taken more seriously.
Yes, because what will happen, I'm not saying they'll go away, but I'm suggesting that right now people don't see or feel what science is doing to them. They've grown accustomed to their iPhone. They've grown accustomed to flying at 500 miles an hour at 31,000 feet. When you advance a frontier, new things are coming at you all the time. Okay, so we do have advances in telecommunications. Yes, I have an iPhone today that 10 years ago I'd be burnt at the stake for wielding if I was discovered holding one. So not that society does not have advances, but the kinds of advances that come about from grand epic adventures, that's a whole other scale. And when that scale pervades culture, then it becomes part of how we think about the world. The world is not just what I want it to be. The world is as it is revealed to us through the methods and tools of science. If you're not in a position to understand or embrace those facts, then you're going to feel like the world should be just whatever you think it should be. So there'd be a force operating against that kind of thinking if we had science appearing on the headlines every day.
Let's talk a little bit about space exploration specifically. I mean, in your mind, there are a number of different reasons why some say it's a good idea or a bad idea to explore space, right? And this ranges from adventure, like you said, to, hey, we might need a new planet to go to if and when we destroy this one. What do you see as the biggest reason to explore space to the max, so to speak?
All of those are great reasons. They're just not good enough to force anyone to write a fat check to enable it. You can go down the list. It's in our DNA. We're for science. We're explorers. We're Americans. It's fundamental to our identity. You can go down the list. But the history of the world tells me that none of those reasons are sufficient to dislodge major funds from a Congress, from a check-writing Congress. But what is? The threat that we might be annihilated by war, the threat that if you die, you might die poor. Both of these, my read of history tells me, are potent drivers for the expenditure of major sums of money in any kind of enterprise at all. So that list you started and that I helped complete, they're all good reasons, but they're insufficient. So my goal now is to convince Congress and others, primarily others, the electorate, that space is an investment, an economic investment. And when you couch it in those terms, it's very easy to say how much you should put in based on how much you expect back.
What do you think about the issues that inevitably, well, they were kind of in a funny way brought up when Newt Gingrich started talking about moon bases, of what happens once we start pushing that frontier out into space, as far as who owns this stuff, right? I mean, both the intellectual capital as well as the physical capital of what's in space, it seems like a recipe for disaster given the kind of global circumstances around ownership of stuff.
Yeah, there's no reason to think it would be any different from what has happened here on Earth. You know, the urge to say, oh, space is for everyone and it would be peaceful. What, Earth is not for everyone, and we wage war on Earth, but somehow we're going to behave differently when we go into space. I don't have that much confidence in humanity. And so I'm betting that people who create colonies wherever they land, they're going to annex them to their countries. That's my guess. And if you don't like that, then you got to go make your own colony, and then guess what? You end up fighting about it. Oh, wow, humans fighting each other over territory? What a concept. You know, I mean, so I'm not convinced, unless you send only scientists to the moon.
Scientists are the one group that's able to not fight over stuff.
Scientists have never led armies into battle. It's just not what we do, all right? We recognize that there is a truth that sits above whatever truth we might be arguing, and that we're going to reach that truth one day, so let's keep arguing until we do. But I'm not going to kill you for thinking differently.
In the last couple of minutes we have left, I want to talk to you a little bit about Ray Kurzweil, of all people. I recently saw a fascinating documentary about him, and he talks about this idea of the singularity. And I mention him only as a context. My real question is, as technology development continues to advance, Do you imagine that something similar to what Kurzweil describes as the singularity may happen, where the advancement of technology itself outpaces humans' ability to use that technology? Give me your thoughts on that.
No, I'm not convinced by it. Well, first of all, I'm pissed off he's using the word singularity. That's our word for black holes, okay, the center of black holes. So I want that word back.
Okay.
I'm going to invent some other word, all right? You tell him I said that.
All right.
All right. So apart from that, I don't, the brain is a messy, complex place. Human biology doesn't have the precision of machines. It's just a mess. It's a mess, and it has disorders. So to say, oh, one day the computer will pass the human brain, well, I sure hope it does, because ours is completely messed up. Ours is one of the worst data-taking devices there ever was. And in fact, it's our expectation that we are somehow good at getting data that delayed the progress of science for millennia. It was not until we had the methods and tools of science to decode the nature of to decode the natural world without reference to the capacity of our senses to do so. And so to say, oh, we're going to pass our brain, I don't see what's so special about that. We have machines that pass us physically. That's great. Let the machine do the work. I'll sit home, eat popcorn, and watch the game. I'm not jealous that we have machines that move faster than we do. We call them cars. We have machines that go faster than cars.
But I think the idea would be we still know how to utilize those machines, even though they surpass us. I think more is the idea that technology will outpace even our ability to use that technology.
Yeah, if you look at every single dystopic science fiction story ever written, it takes something that was freshly introduced into culture and then runs it into a dystopic future. And none of those cases have ever come remotely true. Ever. Just to go back and look at it. So the idea, oh, we're going to make a robot, oh, the robots will take over the world. Oh, we're going to do, don't go inside the atom because then we'll destroy the world. Well, we almost destroyed the world, but we didn't, okay? But usually it's the autonomic thing that people are afraid of, all right? You might set a chain reaction in all the world. That has never, ever, ever, ever happened. So to think that computers will get so powerful, there'll be a singular change in how we interact with each other or with machines, I just don't see that. If the computer has too much computing power, then what I need, I shut it off. What's so hard? I can't get whipped up in this. I just, and then the talk of maybe one day we'll connect the computer to our neurobiology, and then you have thoughts that are in the computer. We essentially already have that, all right?
Right.
And I don't have to plug this in. I just turn it on, and the entire world is at my fingertips here. And that's almost as good as being inside my head, okay? But instead of inside my head, it's here. It's in arm's reach, and it fits in my shirt pocket.
It's brilliant.
So I don't need to plug it into my cerebellum to get the information, because this is good enough for me. What does that do next?
Understood.
I don't know. Maybe something I'm missing here. I don't know.
Understood. The book is Space Chronicles. We've been speaking with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Congratulations on the great book. Really enjoyed reading it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
All right. So Neil deGrasse Tyson. Now, after the fact, we had a flood of people who emailed in, and they were saying, oh, I've never heard of your show, but it's so cool you had Neil deGrasse Tyson on. Now, half went on to say how cool they thought it was and how they're now going to watch our show. So that was good. But at the same time, there were a ton of people who just wanted to criticize that we didn't ask the right questions. They had a specific science question they wanted Neil deGrasse Tyson to answer. I wasn't really mad at anybody. I understand that it was a 10 or 12 minute interview. We can't possibly answer every question, but every time he comes back, we try to get as many audience questions to him.
If I were going to interview Neil deGrasse Tyson for any duration, for any number of time, I could go for probably 4 hours asking him question after question, but we just can't do that. What can you do?
All right, Neil deGrasse Tyson, his first appearance on the David Pakman Show classic interview.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Time for audience questions. This is quickly becoming one of the most popular segments on the show, particularly of the Friday show. Okay, Molly wrote in and said, who is the most famous fan of the David Pakman Show? We actually don't really know. So at one point, there was a member named David Ogden Steers. We don't know whether it is the famous actor from the MASH television series. I actually emailed to ask him if that is the case, and he never responded. His membership expired, and we have not heard from him since. So it's possible that David Ogden Steers was or is a fan of the David Pakman Show. John Amici, the former NBA basketball player, when we interviewed him, he said he was a fan of the show and he was aware of the show and he watched the show. So that would be another one. Alan Colmes, the radio host, is someone who I've been in touch with since moving to New York City, and he's visited our studio, and I chat with him, and he follows the interviews that we do on the show. I don't know if we can say he's a fan of the show overall, like a regular viewer. Those are the ones that come to mind, but I would think, Lewis, that there are some people we just don't know about.
Probably. There are probably people, members who sign up, who use different names. But we just really have no way of determining who they really are.
If you are someone that is famous and we don't know that you're a fan of the show, please let us know, because I think it would be really cool, Lewis, to know some of the people. I know that when we interviewed Eric O'Neill, he's the former FBI agent that was portrayed in the movie Breach by the actor Ryan Phillippe. Ryan Phillippe tweeted out that interview several times. My assumption is Ryan Phillippe is not a viewer, regular viewer, or a fan of this program in any way. I think he just tweeted that out because he had played the guy we interviewed. So I don't really know, but we would love to know. So if you are a famous person or know of a famous person who watches or listens to this program, let us know. I'd be so curious, Lewis.
I am very curious, but I can also understand them not wanting to contact us and remain anonymous. And that's fine. That's their prerogative.
Next audience question from Eddie. Eddie says, what are the most significant interactions you have had with police in your life? Well, Lewis,
the funny thing is that, believe it or not, David is probably better suited to answer this question than I am.
I've told the story of when I was a few months shy of my 21st birthday. I had just arrived at a friend's little party somewhere with about 20 or 25 people in Massachusetts. I had served myself a beer in one of those red Solo cups that everybody knows about. I hadn't even taken a sip yet when there's a knock on the door. One of our friends yells from the back of the house, "Come in." I'm standing right in front of the door. In walk two police officers showing up because of a noise complaint. See me with my beer. I simply put it down. They say, "Hold on a second. How old are you?" And the rest is history. I ended up being taken downtown. Ultimately, it didn't make it onto my record. And it was one of the most ridiculous instances of police really missing the forest for the trees, because in their feverance, to quote Lewis, in their feverance in getting me downtown and proving a point, they ended the party by sending home tons of people with drunk drivers, saying, "Are you okay to drive?" "Yeah, sure." Never really checking on that, and forcing drunk drivers to drive people home. And it just was the most ridiculous incident, and that's the most significant interaction I've had with police, Lewis.
Yeah, some of my friends and I were doing stupid stuff one cabbage night, and we had an interaction with the police. It was quite a scene, but it really ended up being kind of anticlimactic. Nothing really happened. I mean, there
remember, of course, Cabbage Night, the night before Halloween, where some people like to go out and cause chaos.
Right. Anarchy, if you will. But there was another time where I was stopped at a DUI checkpoint, a sobriety checkpoint, as some people call them. And I guess I annoyed the state trooper who was administering my sobriety test. Right off the bat, he didn't like me. But I ended up passing. He ended up letting me go, and it wasn't a big deal, despite the fact that I had had several drinks. I was probably the most sober one in the vehicle. That's why I was driving it. It wasn't even my car. Really, other than that, just about every interaction I've had with the police ended up with nothing happening, with both parties just parting ways.
Lewis, speaking of sobriety checkpoints, it's become very popular on the internet. You see these videos where at sobriety checkpoints, people assert their constitutional rights by refusing to answer any questions. And sometimes it leads to some funny but also frustrating interactions with police, where you basically say, why am I being stopped? Am I suspected of a crime? I'm not answering any questions. Am I free to go? Are you detaining me? Blah, 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 blah. Would it ever cross your mind to engage police in that way, or does that just seem kind of like a waste of time to you?
It would depend on the situation. I think I've never, maybe at certain points when I was younger and had interactions with the police, I would have realized that I had that option. But more recently, I haven't had that option. But I am certainly open to doing that if I feel like there is really no reason for the cops to be questioning me. Yes.
All right. Wow. So Lewis may be the next cop block internet hero. We will see if that ever surfaces on YouTube. If you do something like that, Lewis, please videotape it at least, so then we can, play it and talk about it on the show. Here's one more audience question. This is a voicemail question. 219-2-DAVID-P is our voicemail number. It is from Heather, and it is about lethal injection and the death penalty. Listen to this.
I'm curious if there are any circumstances you can imagine, either of you, in which you would attend a public execution, a lethal injection. That is my question today.
Okay. Then Heather goes on to talk about other stuff. So let's focus in on that question. We're against the death penalty, right, Lewis? So we believe that the death penalty is inhumane. It should be abolished, that it is not a deterrent to crime, that 1 in 25, as a recent study shows, 1 in 25 individuals on death row are not guilty of the crime. So the question is, would we ever personally attend a public execution or lethal injection? I can imagine, and I've said this before, situations where if someone I know was the victim of a gruesome, heinous crime, killing, etc., I might feel a desire for vengeance, right? And therefore, in that case, may feel differently about the death penalty. But I recognize that wanting vengeance in your individual case is not something on which the law should be based. So I don't know, Lewis. I mean, maybe if someone I knew had been killed and the perpetrator was going to be sentenced to death, that I would be somehow inclined to attend the lethal injection. But I don't know. I'm against the death penalty, and I wouldn't want to even show up to even give legitimacy to the process of the state putting people to death. So I would like to say no. I can't think of any circumstances in which I would attend a public execution.
Right. I think that perhaps I would, just out of curiosity, perhaps. I mean, I think it would be interesting.
Very morbid curiosity, right?
Morbid curiosity. I think it would be interesting to be in the room or the area to observe what other people are doing, saying, perhaps thinking, just to observe the entire situation. And I don't know, it might give me a new perspective on things, not necessarily the injection, the putting down of the person themselves, just other things. I don't know. I think it might just be an interesting experience. Although, like David said, I wouldn't want to endorse it. But
what about this, Lewis? Is there any type of execution, be it a firing squad, electrocution, a guillotine, right? Is there some other form of execution that you would either be more likely or less likely to attend if it were employed?
I think I would be much less likely to attend the more gruesome executions. So I guess injection, electric chair, those hangings, I mean, I guess those are known to be the less gruesome executions. firing squads, decapitations, burnings, boilings. Those are the types of things I might not want to see.
All right. What are your thoughts on this? Even if you are against the death penalty, are there situations where you would attend a lethal injection or otherwise death penalty, carrying out of the death penalty? That is it for audience questions. That is it for the show. We have a great bonus show coming up for you. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up and davidpakman.com/gear to order David Pakman Show hoodies, sweatshirts, and t-shirts made from 100% recycled fabric. Incredibly soft. Lewis is wearing his shirt today. We'll talk to you on Monday.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.